Welcome to the Spectrum Connection, a podcast hosted by Jess
and Alyce. As two mums of neurodivergent kids, we are here to share our experiences, insights, and advice with other parents navigating this unique journey.
Join us as we discuss everything from daily challenges to breakthrough moments, all with a focus on understanding and celebrating neurodivergence. Episode 3. Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of the Spectrum Connection. We're back.
And we're going to be talking about schooling options in this episode. It's a requested subject.
Highly requested subject to talk about. A lot of people have struggles with school and figuring out what school is right for their kids. So I guess, what we're going to be talking about in this episode is more about the options that are out there and then more into our experiences of these options. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've tried a few options in my household anyway. I've got a bit of experience with a few of them. So, will we just go through what the options are and then...
Do you want to do a quick self-care shout out?
Reminded me. Actually, what I was thinking, since our first episode, we've had people jump on to our Instagram and let us know what they were doing throughout the episodes. Some people drinking a coffee or, and I loved hearing that. And so, of course, I wanted to give the prompt for self-care. If you haven't done anything for yourself, make sure you do something. But I would also love you to jump on our Instagram and share with us what you do when you're listening to the podcast. That would be really cool. And I think it might give someone else some ideas of what they can do for some self-care. So we'll try that this week, I think.
I actually had one of you guys were listening to our podcast this morning in their car on their drive to work. So, but I think it's really cool. And something that we're going to be doing in the next episode is we're going to be doing a little bit of a shout out. So anyone who comments on any of our social media posts or reels, we're going to do a shout out to you guys because we're very thankful for all of your contributions and feedback. We had some great feedback after our last episode. So I'm excited to see what you have to say. And let's head on into schooling options.
All right. Well, I think the main schooling options we have are mainstream schooling. Then we've got mainstream schooling.
Makes you want to scream.
Yeah, I want to scream. No, you shouldn't say that.
Sometimes.
Mainstream schooling with support units. What else do we have? We have
mainstream private schools. So that's like Catholic schools or independent schools. And then we have specialist units in mainstream schools. And then we have specialist government schools. So these are disability schools within the mainstream system. So I guess this is all probably sounding a little bit confusing. Maybe we'll just go into a little bit about what they are, because I think when you're at that first stage, and I will say this, you kind of need to get ahead of the game with schooling. I know there's no rush and there's no race against time. However, with schooling, you kind of have to be prepared maybe a year in advance just to be applying for schools. So when we're thinking about schools for our kids, I think the best thing that you can do is explore all options and see what's going to best fit your child. So, for example, if you are going to go into a mainstream school, that's, the public schooling system in Australia, you would go for a visit. You would probably go and talk to the school counselor, or if there are any inclusion support people in that school, and see how they can support your child. So did you have any experience of that going into the mainstream system?
Well, initially with my first child going to the mainstream system, we didn't have diagnosis at that point. So it was kind of and I don't know what it is like in other states. Obviously, other states do things differently, but I know where we are in New South Wales, we're very heavily on zoning for schools. So you go to the mainstream school that you're zoned for, and you don't really get an option on where else that is like, that's your school that you're zoned for, depending on where you live. That's the school that you go to. In certain circumstances, you can go to school out of zone, but you have to apply for that and they have to accept that. And it's a whole process. So yeah, for us, it was just, this is our mainstream school, this is where we live, and that's the school that you go to. So yeah, that's how it works for us.
So I think for Jacob, like for my son's experience, we went to the zoned mainstream school, which at the time we knew Jacob was autistic. So we kind of thought he wouldn't be going into the mainstream public system. However, we found out about specialist mainstream schools and quickly found out that he was eligible for them. So how that works is when you apply for your local zone school, they will do a assessment on your child. And in this meeting, it's not the best meeting. It's very challenge focused and you're answering questions about your child's development in comparison to a child of his age, like at a typical level. And so I will say,
Talking about their worst day, not their best day, as you
yeah,
do
going into
with
that,
AS and all those fun meetings. Yeah.
we didn't know we were going to answer those questions going into that meeting. So
Oh,
that's something I probably would highlight for people is just to be prepared for those questions because I mean, even still to this day, answering those questions are like really really emotional and hard. We know that the focus shouldn't be on that, but that's just the way the system goes at the moment. But anyway, we went into that meeting, and I think what happens is they submit those results to a panel, and then the panel decides where your kids are going to go or where they're eligible for if they're not eligible for mainstream. So if they need more support than a regular school. So that's where Jacob got a spot in a, what is it called? Specialist mainstream school. So
yeah.
that's
So
the process we took.
yeah, and I'll back up with that with support unit in a mainstream school because we've tried that option too. We were at mainstream. The specialized unit was at a different mainstream school, but we went through the same process with panel. So we had to like get diagnosis, then fill out all the paperwork talking about his worst day, not his best day, send that off. Panel meets like once every so often, like there was a wait until panel met. And so, yeah, we were already in the system at this point. Panel met, and then they sit with the selection of children. And it's a really back, like the whole system, isn't it? But anyway,
Yep.
the way it works. And I think we should probably say this is New South Wales. This is our experience. We're both in New South Wales. So I don't know other states, they may do things differently. I'm not really sure. But yeah, panel meets, and then they basically choose between the children they're presented with which child will go in the support unit. And obviously support units, well, not obviously, not everyone knows, but support units have 8 children in them. And so you can imagine if those classes are full, spots only come up every now and again. And so it's kind of, yeah, it's who needs more support, well, who they think needs more support at the time of viewing. So yeah, we got into a mainstream specialized unit, autism specific unit. And so that meant we transferred schools, and that process was like super quick. Like the school, like it went from diagnosis to our mainstream school saying, here's an option, kind of like, can you fill the paperwork in to take that option? Because we think it would be best. And at that time I was like, oh, I don't know. He's got, some friends, and I don't know, like, will he just need support here? It was, do we change? Do we stay? It was a really hard, time. But then I went to the mainstream school with a specialized unit and had a tour, and they explained to me all the things that they do there. And I thought, yeah, okay, this is a really good option for him. So we applied, and then he got in, and I think it was not even 2 weeks, and we were off to the next school. So
Wow.
not a lot of time to transition him at all. It was all a bit of a whirlwind. So yeah, we did that process for him. For my second child, he went to that mainstream school with the specialized units because we we're already there. So I put him in kindergarten there in a mainstream kindergarten. he had lots and lots of difficulties there, and kind of had the support from the specialized unit, you know, aid, but we still had to apply for panel, and the spot was given to someone else. So I had to really advocate a lot, and I went higher up and higher up and higher up. Long story short, they gave us, they put together, I guess, a specialized class for him with a couple of other students. They put funding towards that. And then the next year he had a permanent spot in the support unit. But yeah, just to bring up the fact that just because you're at that school doesn't mean that you're going to, I think some people think, oh, if I go to the mainstream school that has a specialized unit, if we need the specialized unit, they'll be able to gain access to that. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. You still got to go through the same process that anyone else would. So it's another thing to think about.
Yeah, and the other thing that I learnt recently was you have to apply again for like when you finish that school. So like when you go into, for Jacob, it's middle school or high school, you
Yeah.
have to apply again. It's just not a given that you go and
Yeah.
follow on to that new school. So that was a shock to me. I'm like
Yeah.
kind of worried about that. But in Jacob's specialized mainstream school. His school is for all disabilities, so it's not autism focused. And so there's a variety of different disabilities, both actually, every single student at that school has to have a moderate to severe intellectual disability, and that is what they base their eligibility on. Jacob, like I was told, it doesn't matter, the autism, his autism diagnosis didn't matter. It was the intellectual disability. So that's how it works for us. If you are in I don't know how it works for a specialized support unit, but for a mainstream school, there's also the option of having, what are they called? SLSOs,
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
learning support officer. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, they've changed the names so many times over the years.
Teacher's aide
Back
is
in
the
my school
highest.
day, it feels like old saying that, but like teacher's aide, just
Yeah.
plain and simple. They've got a yeah, they've got a specific name these days, but basically,
Yeah. Yeah. So there's
yeah,
the option to apply for that funding through the school. However, the school gets to choose where that funding goes. So it's not a lot of these options, especially in the public mainstream setting, you don't really have a choice as to what support your child gets. It's more like what the school will decide for you. And a lot of people get quite upset about that because, yeah, you know your child best and you know how much support they'll need. However, that is kind of out of your control. I will say that you have the ability to go and tour all different schools before choosing a school and seeing how they can support your child. I think that's the best option, is to sort of see for yourself what the classes look like, what the support systems look like. For Jacob, he has 8 students in his class, 1 teacher and 1 SLSO. So that's the amount of support that he gets. Yeah. And so I think we've kind of I'm assuming we both don't have any experience with the private school option.
not personally. I know some families that are in the private space in our area, and it's a mixed reviews depending on families. I think that's the hard part of it is, you can go to a school that's been recommended to you that you've heard great things about, but may not suit your family or suit your child. Experiences are all different. I know of several families that recommend a certain Catholic school in our area and have had great success there, whereas another family has gone there and didn't have success and have pulled their child out. So yeah, it's really individual thing, which makes it even harder. When I was thinking about the funding side of things that you were saying about mainstream schools, from my understanding is that all children with disability get a specific amount of funding. Like you might not actually apply for that funding yourself. The school just automatically receives that, but it all goes into a big bucket for the school to then decide where that support's needed. So it's, yeah, and if your child, you know, uh, all schools would be different, but from, you know, experiences and stories I've heard, I think is if your child doesn't display like behaviors of concern, maybe they're flying under the radar, they're quiet, they get their work done, that kind of thing, they're probably less likely to receive support than the children who, yeah, show those behaviors or aren't completing work. So
Yeah, I
that's
think
another
it's
thing.
more from like a safety perspective over
Yeah.
the level of support we think our kids deserve. And you mentioned before, like every student's experience is different. That's something that I did before school is look on like the local Facebook pages and see what everyone was saying about different schools. That was helpful. But then in the end, I think, as you said, everyone has a different experience. So, I mean, I would advise looking at those recommendations and talking to people in your local area about the schools, but don't base your decisions off them because
Yes.
it might be different for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just, you know, like you said, go and have a look, ask the questions, you know, jot down some questions that you have on how supports work, and ask those questions well ahead of time so that you can be prepared as well and kind of go in with a plan. Yeah,
And
and it's early childhood centres. I know, yeah, I know at the moment, especially where we are, wait lists are really, really long. And people are kind of just like putting their child's name on every single wait list because they need to return to work or things. But in an ideal world, you would kind of go around to all those childcare centres to kind of determine which one would be a right fit for your child. So yeah, it's the same with schools.
And you just mentioned something about the, sorry, you just mentioned something about the early intervention programs, which is something that happens in New South Wales. I'm not sure 100% if it happens in other states, but if you're in New South Wales, there's a option to apply, and I believe you do this through the local school again, is you apply for the early intervention program. Now, someone told us to do this when Jacob got his diagnosis. So he was 2.5, and they said you need to get in the year before school. So you need to apply so that he can go to this early intervention program the year before he goes to school. Now, we went and we applied and we got into the early intervention program. Did we like it? I'm careful about what I say. I don't think Jacob enjoyed it. And
This sorry,
yeah,
that would have been the early, so it's early intervention, but in a mainstream school
yeah,
setting, or yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
because I understand not all schools offer the early intervention program either. So, because we were going to go through that process with my third child, and I kind of thought, oh, I don't know if it's really beneficial because they're going through the early intervention program at a different school to the school that they'll be going to.
Yeah, and what I didn't know about that program was they have a lot of say in what support needs your child needs in school. So I would just be mindful of that when you're going into those programs. They do, as I've found out, write reports and things, and I've seen them since. But Jacob just, he was so young, and I just sort of think, was it necessary? He was already in preschool and loving his preschool. So I was like, was it really necessary? Maybe that's what pushed him into getting that specialized support. I'm not sure in school. But yeah, that was the year before school. So that is an option. And I think it was like 2 mornings a week for 3 hours, I believe. That stage was really a blur for me.
Yeah, well, when you're
Trying to-
saying that now, I'm like, oh my goodness, we went through that with my
yeah.
first. We did that earlier, and I've forgotten all about it. We did that program, but it was at the actual, like they offered it at the school that we were going into. And I had, so I didn't even know about diagnosis at this stage, but I had concerns about how he was going to transition to the school system and things. And I remember I actually got a report at the end of it, you know, like those checklist things, like can they put the things in their bag, and can they, like, any concerns that the early intervention people had, and it was all a positive report and no concerns whatsoever. And so I kind of felt like, oh, it's my anxiety that I have about him going to school. It's got nothing to, he's going to be fine. Yeah, completely different when it's the actual thing.
And that's really big on, and I know you've talked about this before, I feel like that's really big on the amount a child can speak and communicate. I feel like that really puts, like, I don't know, it's very heavily considered in what supports your child gets. So a lot of people have that experience of their kids can speak and can communicate quite well, and sometimes ahead of the game, and that sort of portrays to these people that, oh, they don't need all these support needs or support class or specialized support units. And yeah, and I know that you've had a lot of experience with that. And our next episode will be going into more of that homeschool experience for you. But sorry. I think we should answer some of the questions that we had about school.
I was just going to say quickly too, because we didn't even touch on that, that the other schooling options is homeschool or distance education.
Yeah,
Yeah, if that's something that, yeah.
I feel like we could have had like 10 episodes on this, um, just talking about it all. But yeah, that's the other option is homeschooling, distance education, unschooling. I don't know if that's an option, but yeah, we are going to be going into that in our next episode. And you're going to take that away because I don't have any experience with that.
I could talk 10 episodes on that alone too.
So, question one, someone was asking about toilet training and school. And this I have no idea about.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking, like, I don't know, I need a little bit more context for the question, I think, to answer it. I understand for schools, they obviously want children to be toilet trained because, I mean, for mainstream schools, I'm not sure about specialized schools, but mainstream schools, they want children to be toilet trained because from my understanding, they're not allowed to offer support in bathrooms. It's not like early childhood where we're there and that's part of our role. I don't believe that teachers have that scope to be able to help with that. So that's obviously tricky if your child isn't at that stage. But toilet training is so hard because it's not an easy thing. Like, it's very developmental. It comes down to the child when they're ready. It's not something that you can rush or, yeah, to push through. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think if the question is toilet training before school and you're not quite there yet and you're worried about your child going into mainstream schooling and not yet toilet trained, then that's like really a professional scope, where you maybe start reaching out to other professionals that might be able to help you with that toilet training side of things, and getting down to the bottom of why the toilet training isn't happening, because there's a multitude of reasons why that might not be happening. I do know from my early childhood experience, we did have a particular child who wasn't toilet trained coming up to school. He was still in nappies. He was going into a mainstream school. At this point, he did not have a diagnosis of any sort, but I think from memory, they ended up getting an exemption for a certain period of time at the start of the school year so that he could get that toilet training happening before he started. I can't remember exactly what that process looked like, but I mean, I'd be asking all the questions from, the school and the early childhood provider if you engage with them, and yeah, and your therapist if you've got them as well, and to see what they think would be the best steps for your child.
There's so
Right.
much pressure in that scenario. Like, I feel like I get a lot of questions from parents is like, how am I supposed to do this before school? I think school is putting a lot of pressure on parents. They're like, they need to be toilet trained to come to our school. So within support units and within specialized government schools, they don't need to be toilet trained. I know that from experience, but I think that pressure often can have an adverse reaction on your kids, like I honestly think with toilet training, I've always said this, it just needs to be on their timeline and no amount of pressure on that. So I feel like if you're in that situation, as Alyce said, like ask all the questions, see how you can sort of get an exemption or something like that. Just don't put too much pressure on yourself. Yeah, it's just hard.
Don't rush your child for the system at
No.
all, because like, yeah, it's the pressure just makes it worse. Just
Mhm.
yeah, can push you back,
Yeah.
push the process back a hell of a lot if you rush it before it's ready.
Yeah. That's a whole
Yeah,
nother topic we could talk
that
about.
is. Let's jot that one down, because yeah,
The next question we
just
had.
about systems in general. My goodness.
Oh,
Anyway,
yeah. Yeah.
let's go to the next question.
I feel like if we were in a conversation, this podcast would be a little different. Like this conversation
Yeah,
might be a little different, but we've got eyes on us and ears on us. And I know,
in a few episodes, we let our guard down a little bit. It might just come out, and yeah,
I mean, it
who
doesn't
knows?
really matter. I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't see like any negative repercussions of that. I think people should know. I'm going to read out a comment. So someone had a comment about this and they said, my son finally has been accepted into a special education school. Took almost 3 years to get there. So congratulations, whoever that was.
Advocating in those 3 years, I bet.
Mm. It's
Yeah.
it's big and it's a lot to go through when you're not getting that support that you think your child needs. And advocating is tiring, it's
It
exhausting.
is. Yeah. It's a full-time job there
Yeah. Yeah.
on its
And
own.
it's confrontational too, because I think a lot of schools and systems, and this may not be all of them, but a lot of them, they can get quite defensive and very ready to fight almost when someone's trying to advocate for their child, when all they're trying to do is get their child the best support. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I could talk about that a lot too. The other question we had was about someone was just asking about the different types of schools, but they brought up the Aspect School, and I thought that was good one to talk about as well. That is a private autism school. And I believe they also have satellite classes within mainstream schools as well. So that's another
Yeah.
option.
And an online option as well.
Oh, they have online as
A
well.
distance, yeah, like a distance ed option.
Oh,
So you do, yeah, it's doing online. And then I think the children have to go to like their base school for so many days a year or something.
yeah.
Yeah, but that is an option, because we looked at that as well
Okay.
when we looked at all our schooling options when schooling wasn't working.
That's
Yeah.
good to know. And I think not a lot of people are aware of all these options, and our time is running out, I will just say. So,
Okay.
what we're going to be going into the next episode is talking more on this topic and talking about when school doesn't work out,
Yeah.
when your child isn't being supported enough, and what next steps to take, I guess. Yeah. So we're going to end this podcast here and we will pick it back up. I hope you guys enjoyed it and we'll see you then.